The autumn sky over Schweinfurt stretched endlessly in all directions on October 14, 1943, and pilot Heinz Knock stared through the armored windscreen of his Messerschmitt Bf-109G6 fighter, gripping the control stick with white knuckles. High above the German heartland at nearly 24,000 feet, what he witnessed defied everything he thought he understood about air combat. That evening, he would open the diary he'd kept faithfully since 1941 and write words that trembled with both awe and despair. The sky itself seemed to have turned into bombers. Stretching from horizon to horizon in perfect, terrible formation, they filled the air like a plague of locusts. More than 290 Boeing B-17 flying fortresses of the American 8th Air Force filled the autumn heavens, their massive shapes stacked carefully between 23,000 and 27,000 feet in precisely organized combat boxes. These weren't scattered attacks. This was an aerial armada. The morning sun caught their aluminum skin and turned it into something almost beautiful. A river of polished silver flowing steadily toward Germany's industrial heartland. Each four-engine bomber carried 13 50-caliber machine guns bristling from turrets and gun bays. Combined, they represented a defensive wall of firepower so intense that the sky itself became a lethal corridor where nothing could safely pass. Yet it wasn't simply the overwhelming numbers that made Knock's blood freeze in his veins. He had encountered large formations before and survived. What truly terrified him was a realization that had been growing clearer in the minds of every Luftwaffe pilot over recent months. Yesterday, just yesterday, his squadron had participated in destroying 60 American bombers in the first Schweinfurt raid, a victory that German headquarters had proclaimed as the Luftwaffe's greatest single-day triumph. The Americans had lost crews, aircraft, and precious supplies to that attack. They should have been reeling from the blow. Instead, they had simply sent more bombers, as though the losses meant nothing to them at all. Behind Knock, roughly 300 German fighters climbed into position. Messerschmitt Bf-109s, Focke-Wulf 190s, twin-engine Messerschmitt Bf-110s, and even obsolete Junkers Ju-87 Stuka dive bombers hastily modified to attack bombers from below. It represented nearly every serviceable fighter aircraft the Germans could gather within 400 kilometers. The pilot knew with absolute certainty what made his hands tremble slightly as he prepared to attack. This massive force represented everything Germany could muster. There would be no second wave waiting in reserve, no reinforcements, no fresh squadrons held back for emergencies. This was everything. What Knock and every pilot in the formation understood was the terrifying calculus that had begun unfolding 18 months earlier, though few of the Luftwaffe's senior commanders had truly grasped its meaning at the time. Back in January 1942, the first American heavy bombers, B-17s of the 97th Bombardment Group, had landed in England with considerable fanfare. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring had reportedly laughed when informed of their arrival. American boys couldn't fight, he declared with certainty. Their bombers were nothing but furniture vans, clumsy flying boxes that would disintegrate under the stress of real combat. Major Johannes Steinhoff, commanding a fighter unit in North Africa at that moment, would later write in his memoirs that the Luftwaffe's complete dismissal of American air power represented the war's most catastrophic intelligence failure. Steinhoff himself had encountered American-built aircraft serving with British squadrons and found them remarkably solid. The Americans, he observed, built aircraft the same way they built automobiles, with interchangeable parts, simplified systems that could be repaired anywhere, and in quantities that stunned European minds accustomed to craft production. The first serious warning signs had appeared on August 17, 1942, when 18 B-17 bombers struck the Rouen-Sotteville marshalling yards in France. Rudolf Plantz, then commanding a specialized high-altitude squadron equipped with pressurized Bf-109GA-1 fighters, had participated in the interception. His after-action reports from that period, discovered in Luftwaffe archives long after the war's end, noted with professional concern a pattern that should have alarmed Berlin. These bombers maintained formation despite catastrophic damage. One B-17 returned to England with more than 200 cannon holes punched through its fuselage and wings. Their defensive gunnery is coordinated and murderous, Plans had written. But the production statistics that accompanied these reports should have terrified Germany's high command. Those 18 bombers represented less than 2 days of American factory production. By contrast, Germany's entire aircraft industry in 1942 produced only 15,409 aircraft of every type combined, fighters, bombers, transports, and trainers all together. The Boeing plant in Seattle was already approaching a production rate that would reach 16 B-17s per day by mid-1944. The October 14, 1943, mission to destroy the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt would become known as Black Thursday to the American crews who survived it, a day when the 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers and 600 airmen. For the Luftwaffe, it simultaneously represented their greatest victory, and the moment when many experienced pilots began acknowledging the terrible truth. The war had already been lost. Oberfuhrer Hans Phillips, commanding his fighter group, shot down 2 B-17s that morning before defensive fire from a third bomber killed him. His wingman, Stefan Litarius, survived the chaos and later testified about Phillips's final radio transmission. "These are not the same Americans we faced 6 months ago," Phillips had radioed just before his death. "Their gunnery strikes with deadly accuracy. They hold formation under any punishment imaginable." Berlin tells us this is only the beginning. The official Luftwaffe communiqué claimed 60 bombers destroyed and 17 damaged, the service's highest single-day score of the entire war. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels announced it as irrefutable proof of Fortress Europe's impenetrable defenses. Yet the pilots who had flown through the American defensive fire knew a different story. They had expended 90% of their ammunition in those attacks. They had lost 38 fighters destroyed outright and 30 more damaged beyond quick repair. 28 pilots had been killed or wounded. Nearly a quarter of the attacking force gone. More terrifying still was what followed. Within 48 hours, American reconnaissance aircraft photographed the Schweinfurt factories and assessed the damage. Within 7 days, 240 replacement B-17s had crossed the Atlantic and landed in England. Within 2 weeks, the 8th Air Force had mounted another massive raid with 378 bombers, more aircraft than had participated in the Schweinfurt mission itself. Major Adolf Galland's brother Wilhelm, commanding a fighter group, wrote in his diary a bitter observation. "We are struggling against mathematics," he wrote. "Each bomber we destroy is replaced by 2. Each pilot we lose is replaced by boys with barely 20 hours of fighter experience. The Americans lose air crews and train thousands of replacements. We lose pilots and we scrape the bottom of the barrel." The winter of 1943 into 1944 brought temporary relief as weather conditions restricted deep penetration bombing raids. But this period also brought devastating intelligence reports circulating among senior Luftwaffe commanders. These captured documents, many recovered intact when Germany fell, painted a picture of industrial capacity that dwarfed anything German strategists had imagined possible. The Ford plant at Willow Run in Michigan had achieved what German industrial experts had declared impossible: assembly line production of 4-engine heavy bombers on an industrial scale. The facility sprawled across 3.5 million square feet and employed 42,000 workers laboring around the clock. At peak production in April 1944, a completed B-24 Liberator rolled off the assembly line every 63 minutes, 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly. That single plant would ultimately produce 6,972 complete bombers, plus knockdown kits for another 1,893 aircraft, a total contribution of 8,865 bombers. In December 1943, Colonel Joseph Pellerin of Fighter Command obtained a captured American technical manual describing the latest B-17G model. His report to headquarters stated facts that must have seemed almost absurd. This new B-17 variant carries 13 machine guns, including a chin turret specifically engineered to defeat our frontal attacks. They have thought of everything. They have planned for everything. They possess the resources to plan for everything. The Boeing plants in Seattle and Wichita were producing 363 B-17s monthly at peak capacity. Douglas plants in Long Beach and Oklahoma City added 400 B-24s. Consolidated in San Diego and Fort Worth contributed another 300 heavy bombers. Martin in Baltimore was producing 266 medium bombers. North American in Kansas City was building 400 B-25 medium bombers. Republic on Long Island was manufacturing 447 fighters monthly. Against this staggering output, Germany's entire monthly production of single-engine fighters in late 1943 averaged 1,600 aircraft, though actual deliveries were reduced further due to bombing of German production facilities. Between February 20 and 25, 1944, Operation Argument, remembered by history as Big Week, demonstrated American air power on a scale that shattered the final illusions harbored by Luftwaffe commanders. On the opening day, Heinz Baer, commanding a fighter unit, took off from his airfield to intercept what radar reported as a massive formation approaching from the west. Climbing through 20,000 feet, he found himself confronting 1,033 American heavy bombers with 835 fighter escorts stretching across 200 miles of sky. That night, Baer wrote in his diary the words that captured his despair. "I have witnessed the end of Germany. The sky was dark with them. Our 12 fighters attacked a formation that stretched beyond our sight. It was like 12 men assaulting an army. We may have shot down perhaps 6 bombers. They barely acknowledged our presence. The Americans had launched 3,800 bomber sorties and 2,548 fighter sorties during Big Week. They lost 226 bombers and 28 fighters, losses replaced within 14 days. The Luftwaffe lost 262 fighters and suffered a catastrophic blow with nearly 100 experienced pilots killed, representing 14% of the total fighter pilot force. These pilots represented years of training and experience that could never be recovered." Colonel Hannes Treutzschler, responsible for fighter pilot training, compiled a devastating assessment. The average American pilot arrives in combat with more than 200 hours of flight experience, including 75 hours specifically in the B-17 escort mission profile. Our new pilots arrive with 40 hours total flight time, perhaps 10 of those in a fighter aircraft. They are not pilots. They are victims awaiting their inevitable deaths. March 4, 1944, marked the beginning of the end for German air defense. On this date, American P-51 Mustang fighters appeared over Berlin for the first time, escorting bombers on the 1,100-mile round trip to the German capital itself. The psychological impact devastated every pilot who witnessed it. Major Günther Rahl, commanding a fighter group and ranking as Germany's third highest-scoring ace with 275 victories, encountered Mustangs for the first time during the follow-up raid on March 6. His combat report, preserved in German archives, contained observations that stripped away any remaining hope. The P-51 is faster than our Bf-109G at all altitudes. It turns with superior agility. It dives faster. It carries ammunition in quantities we cannot match. We have perhaps 60 seconds of cannon fire, while they have unlimited ammunition. Most critically, it possesses the range to escort bombers anywhere within Germany and still fight for 30 minutes over the target. The Mustang's Packard-built Merlin engine and laminar flow wing gave it a range of 1,250 miles with drop tanks, sufficient to escort bombers to any German target and engage in combat for extended periods. German pilots who had trained to attack when fighter escorts turned back at their range limit now discovered fresh American fighters waiting above them over Prague, Vienna, and Warsaw. Lieutenant Franz Stiegler, a seasoned veteran of 487 combat missions, described this new reality in a letter to his brother. "The Mustangs wait above us like hawks circling their prey. When we climb to attack the bombers, they dive upon us. Their speed in the dive exceeds 500 miles per hour. By the time we evade their attack, the bombers have escaped. If we pursue the bombers, the Mustangs destroy us from behind. It is systematic execution without mercy." By April 1944, the 8th Air Force could mount 1,000 bomber raids protected by 800 fighter escorts, and did so with increasing frequency. The calculus of annihilation became simple and inexorable. General Adolf Galland, commanding Germany's entire fighter force, presented a report to Hitler on April 27, 1944, that laid bare the unvarnished reality. American bomber production, 3,000 or more per month. American fighter production, 4,000 or more per month. American pilot training graduates, 30,000 or more per month. German fighter production, 1,600 per month, with actual deliveries reduced by bombing. German pilot training graduates, 500 per month, and many inadequately trained. German pilot losses, 400 or more per month. The enemy comes in waves without ceasing, Galland told Hitler. For every bomber we destroy, they send 3 replacements. For every fighter we shoot down, they send 5. We are not fighting an air force. We are fighting an airborne industry. According to Galland's memoirs, Hitler's response involved screaming accusations of betrayal and cowardice, ordering that pilots who broke off attacks should be executed by firing squad. This extreme order, demanding that pilots ram bombers if necessary, accelerated the losses among irreplaceable veteran pilots and accomplished nothing militarily. The personal accounts of Luftwaffe pilots from this period reveal the mounting psychological toll of fighting an unwinnable struggle against overwhelming odds. Hauptmann Robert Weiss, commanding a fighter squadron, had 121 confirmed victories when P-51s shot him down and killed him on December 29, 1944. The letter he wrote to his wife the night before his death survives in archives. Each day we have fewer aircraft and fewer qualified pilots. The boys arriving from training can barely land their aircraft, much less engage in combat. Yesterday, we had 6 serviceable fighters to meet 800 bombers and 600 fighters. This is not war anymore, this is execution. Feldwebel Rudi Müller, a maintenance chief with a fighter unit, kept a meticulous diary documenting aircraft availability rates. In January 1944, 67% of fighters were serviceable. By March 1944, serviceability had dropped to 45% due to lack of spare parts. May 1944 showed 31% serviceable, limited by fuel shortages for test flights. By July 1944, only 18% remained serviceable. We cannibalized 3 aircraft to keep 1 flying, he wrote. The Americans lose 50 aircraft in a single raid and barely acknowledge the loss. We lose 5 fighters and our squadron is crippled for a week. The strategic bombing campaign's impact on German fuel production created cascading failures that multiplied American numerical advantages. By May 1944, bombing of synthetic oil plants had reduced aviation fuel production from 180,000 tons to 20,000 tons monthly. Colonel Hermann Graf, Germany's 9th highest-scoring ace with 212 victories, commanded a fighter unit during this period. His unit's war diary recorded the progressive paralysis consuming his forces. Training flights were cancelled to conserve fuel. Combat missions were limited to 30 to 45 minutes. Aircraft sat on the airfield fully armed with ammunition but unable to fly due to lack of fuel. Pilots were prohibited from pursuing damaged bombers to conserve precious fuel reserves. The Americans arrive with full fuel tanks, fight until ammunition is exhausted, and return home, Graf wrote. We take off with barely enough fuel for 1 pass at the bombers and are fighting withdrawal. If we engage the fighter escorts, we lack fuel to reach the bombers. If we attack the bombers, we cannot evade the escorts. We are defeated before we take off. The Americans consumed 20 million gallons of aviation fuel monthly in the European theater alone, more than Germany's total production capacity. June 6, 1944, brought D-Day and provided perhaps the most stunning demonstration of complete American air supremacy. Colonel Joseph Pellerin, leading his fighter group, was one of only 2 German fighter pilots who managed to attack the invasion beaches on D-Day itself. He and his wingman made a single attack pass on Sword Beach before being forced to flee from dozens of Allied fighters. Where is the Luftwaffe? Hitler demanded with fury. The answer was devastating in its simplicity. The Luftwaffe possessed 319 serviceable fighters in France and Belgium to face 11,590 Allied aircraft. The Americans alone launched 8,722 sorties on D-Day. The Luftwaffe managed to get 319 aircraft into the air. Oberleutnant and Harold Quandt, stationed at Leyla with 2/JG-26, recorded what that day felt like in his diary. We sat in our shelters listening to radio reports. Thousands of ships, thousands of aircraft, just thousands upon thousands. The truth was devastating. They had only 7 fighters available that were actually ready to fly. 7. When the squadron commander gave his order, he made it clear, do not take off. His reasoning was blunt. It would be murder, he said. Not combat, just murder. The arrival of the Me-262 jet fighter in the summer of 1944 sparked something close to hope among certain Luftwaffe pilots. This aircraft could reach 540 miles per hour. That was 100 miles per hour faster than anything the Allies had in the sky. For a moment, it seemed like the technology might turn things around. Major Walter Newtony commanded what became the world's first jet fighter unit, Commando Newtony. Initially, he believed these revolutionary machines could genuinely restore German air superiority. But after just 2 months of actual operations, he submitted a report to Galland. His assessment cut through any remaining optimism. "The jets are revolutionary," he wrote, "but there are far too few of them." The numbers told the story that mattered. Germany had 30 operational Me-262s ready for action. On that same day, the Americans sent 1,500 bombers and 800 fighter escorts. If they had 1,162 jets, Newtony believed they might actually make a difference. But that wasn't going to happen. By year's end, they might have 100. That was the best-case scenario. Newtony himself wouldn't live to see that number. He was killed on November 8, 1944, shot down by P-51s, while attempting to land his damaged Me-262. His last message crackled through the radio. "I'm burning. Too many of them." By the time the war ended, Germany had managed to produce 1,430 Me-262s in total. Only about 300 of these jets ever saw actual combat. The contrast was staggering. America produced 15,000 P-51 Mustangs during the same period. The surviving Luftwaffe aces who endured this machinery of war left behind powerful testimony about what it felt like to face American industrial might. General Adolf Galland, writing after the war in his memoirs titled The First and the Last, captured the essence of the catastrophe. "By mid-1944, I knew the war was lost," Galland wrote. The outcome wasn't determined by tactics anymore. It wasn't about courage or even superior technology. It came down to simple mathematics. It was pure arithmetic. They could absorb the loss of 100 aircraft in a single raid and have replacements ready within 3 days. When Germany lost 10 aircraft, they would never see replacements for them. Major Erich Hartmann, history's most successful fighter ace with 352 confirmed victories, had spent the entire war fighting exclusively on the Eastern Front. Only in the final months did they transfer him west. His first encounter with American bomber formations left him deeply shaken. He had shot down dozens of Soviet aircraft throughout his career, but this was fundamentally different. The Americans came in parade formation, perfect geometric precision, hundreds of them, just wave after wave. Their defensive fire created something that seemed almost solid. It was like a wall of tracer rounds cutting through the sky. These formations would come under attack. Aircraft would catch fire, bombers would start going down, and still the formations held. They maintained their geometric pattern, they kept their discipline, they refused to break. It wasn't heroism in the traditional sense, Hartmann realized. It was something else entirely. It was industrial warfare. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff had flown 993 combat missions and achieved 176 victories. After the war, he served as Chief of Staff of the reconstituted Luftwaffe and later on NATO's military committee. His reflections on American air power carried particular weight because of his perspective. "We were artisans," Steinhoff said, "fighting against an industrial machine. Each German pilot received careful training over years of preparation. Every aircraft came together through handcrafted assembly. The Americans approached it differently. They mass-produced pilots. They mass-produced planes. It was like an automobile factory, except the output was death and destruction. When the Germans shot down a B-17, 10 more appeared to take its place. When the Americans shot down a Bf-109, it was gone forever. By autumn of 1944, the Luftwaffe wasn't dying in combat. It was dying through systematic deprivation. Fuel disappeared. Pilots were used up faster than they could be replaced. Parts became impossible to obtain. Hope evaporated. Major Heinz Beer commanded JG-1 during that final year and kept meticulous records of the collapse. In September 1944, his unit records showed they had 40 pilots and 12 aircraft that could actually fly. Yesterday we received 10 replacement pilots, he wrote. Not a single one had more than 50 hours of total flying time. 3 crashed on landing, 2 are dead. By October, the situation had deteriorated further. Fuel allocation was cut by 75%. They could manage one mission every 3 days. The Americans were coming every single day. By November, orders came down that seemed surreal. If ammunition ran out, pilots were to ram bombers if necessary. Beer wrote the quiet observation. This is not combat. It is suicide. He noted that the Japanese at least had a warrior tradition that acknowledged such sacrifice. The Germans were being asked to die for something that was transparently finished. By December, the reality had become almost abstract in its bleakness. The Americans sent 1,000 bombers in a single raid. Germany had 4 aircraft that could fly. They didn't take off. Beer's simple question haunted the page. What is the point? On January 1, 1945, Operation Bodenplatte launched as the Luftwaffe's final major offensive effort. They gathered every fighter aircraft available in the Western Theater. Approximately 850 to 900 aircraft concentrated for a surprise assault on Allied airfields. It was the largest German air operation the skies had seen in over a year. They destroyed 305 Allied aircraft, most of them caught on the ground. The Allies responded by continuing operations exactly as scheduled. Within a week, every single destroyed aircraft had been replaced. But the German losses cut deeper. They lost 271 aircraft in the operation. More critically, they lost 143 pilots killed or listed as missing. Among the dead were 3 Geschwader commodores and 5 group commanders. These were losses the Luftwaffe could never recover from. Oberstleutnant Dietrich Peltz had planned the operation. After the war, he reflected on the hollow victory. We destroyed more Allied aircraft in one morning than in the previous 3 months combined, Peltz admitted, and it made no difference whatsoever. They replaced everything within days. We lost experienced pilots that we could never replace. We delivered our own death blow. February 1945 brought the final humiliation. The Luftwaffe could barely manage any resistance at all against the 1,000-bomber raids that were systematically destroying every German city. On February 3, 1945, the Americans dispatched 1,437 B-17s and B-24s, escorted by 948 fighters, in a daylight raid on Berlin itself. The Luftwaffe managed to scramble 28 fighters to defend the capital. 23 were shot down. Lieutenant Walter Hagener flew one of the 5 fighters that made it back. He described the moment they climbed toward the bomber stream. It was like flying toward a cloud, except the cloud was made of aluminum and death. The escort fighters were layered above and around them. Hundreds of Mustangs and Thunderbolts. We made one pass. We fired our cannons. We dived away. I don't know if I hit anything. There were so many bombers it didn't matter anyway. March 1945 revealed the full scope of American productive capacity. Intelligence reports reaching Luftwaffe headquarters showed the staggering numbers. The United States had produced 96,318 aircraft in 1944 alone. 35,000 of those were 4-engine heavy bombers. Another 38,873 were fighters. And monthly production was still climbing. Germany's entire aircraft production for 1944 totaled 39,877 machines. Only 25,285 of those were fighters. Most of them never flew at all due to lack of fuel, lack of trained pilots, or lack of replacement parts. During 1944, Germany managed to produce 24,981 fighters, reaching peak monthly output in autumn before Allied bombing of synthetic fuel plants crippled production entirely. Major Wolfgang Falk had created the Luftwaffe's night fighter force. He conducted calculations showing the Americans had dropped 1.46 million tons of bombs on Germany, the explosive equivalent of 33 Hiroshima bombs. The accuracy of American bombing was steadily improving with new radar and navigation systems. By March 1945, American bombers could place 90% of their bomb load within 1,000 feet of the target, even from an altitude of 25,000 feet. Falk observed that they had essentially turned warfare into pure mathematics. So many tons of bombs equals so much destruction, he noted. So many fighters equals air superiority. So many trained pilots equals victory. We were not defeated in the traditional sense. We were calculated out of existence. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe existed only on paper. They supposedly had 1,500 fighters available for duty. In reality, perhaps 50 could actually fly on any given day. Oberst Gordon Golob, credited with 150 victories, received the appointment to command the fighter defense of the Reich in April 1945. He surveyed what was left to work with. No fuel for operations, no ammunition for the aircraft, no pilots capable of flying them, no parts for repairs, no airfields not under constant attack. His first order as commander was also his last. He issued an order that saved the aircraft for the museum. He saved the pilots for their families. The war is over, he declared. Captured Luftwaffe pilots provided extensive testimony after the war about what it meant psychologically to face American air power. General Lieutenant Joseph Schmidt, the last commander of Luftwaffe West, testified at the U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. From 1943 forward, we were not fighting to win, Schmidt said plainly. We were fighting to delay defeat. Every pilot who took off knew he was facing odds of 10 to 1 or worse. They knew each mission might encounter 1,000 bombers. It wasn't combat in any meaningful sense. It was industrial slaughter. Major Georg Peter Eder had 78 victories and personally shot down 36 four-engine bombers. He described how his thinking had evolved throughout the war. In 1943, I believed we could stop them through superior tactics and superior courage, Eder reflected. By early 1944, I knew we needed miracle weapons. By late 1944, I understood we needed an actual miracle. The Americans had transformed air warfare into an assembly line. Germany was fighting against Boeing and Douglas and Lockheed, and Republic and North American and Consolidated. They never had a genuine chance. The final numbers told an impossible story. American aircraft production from 1942 to 1945 totaled 300,000 aircraft of all types across the entire war. This included 35,000 four-engine heavy bombers. It included 99,950 fighters. The United States built 2.3 million aircraft engines. They trained 800,000 pilots. German production over the same period totaled 119,877 aircraft of all types. This included only 1,194 four-engine bombers and 53,729 fighters of all types. Germany trained 28,000 pilots, with training becoming increasingly inadequate as the war went on. In Europe, the Americans lost 18,369 aircraft. This represented 6.1% of their total production. Germany lost 57,000 aircraft. This represented 48% of German production. American aircrew casualties were 94,565. This was 11.8% of pilots trained. German aircrew casualties were 44,655. This represented 157% of pilots trained because many pilots were shot down multiple times. The mathematics were brutal. By May 1945, the United States had 41,163 operational military aircraft available. Germany had fewer than 100. The Luftwaffe pilots who survived endured a profound psychological transformation. They had begun as the world's premier air force, victorious across Spain, Poland, and France. They ended it hiding their aircraft under trees, carefully hoarding enough fuel for one final mission that likely wouldn't matter. Hauptmann Franz von Vera became the only German prisoner of war to successfully escape Allied captivity and return to Germany, though he was later killed in action. He had reported to Göring in 1941 about American industrial capacity after witnessing it firsthand. His warnings were dismissed as defeatist thinking. The Reichsmarschall accused him of being corrupted by enemy propaganda. Göring couldn't even conceive of such industrial power existing. It was simply beyond his comprehension. Oberstleutnant Hans Ulrich Rudel, the most decorated German serviceman of the war, had flown 2,530 combat missions, primarily on the Eastern Front, but encountered American air power in 1945. His observation was sharp and clear. The Soviets had quantity, he said. The Americans had quantity that worked perfectly. Every bomber was pristine. Every fighter was maintained with immaculate precision. Their pilots were well-fed, well-rested, and well-trained. We were sending skeletal boys in patched aircraft with empty stomachs to face them. Major Heinz Knoke had flown 2,000 missions and scored 33 victories. He kept detailed records of how the odds changed throughout the war. In 1943, they attacked bomber formations of 60 to 100 aircraft. Dangerous but manageable, with 20 to 30 fighters committed to the defense. By early 1944, formations had grown to 200 to 300 bombers, escorted by 100 fighters. Germany needed everything available just to make an impression. By late 1944, formations had ballooned to 500 to 750 bombers, with 400 escort fighters. Knoke watched them fly over, unable to reach them with his 12 serviceable aircraft. By 1945, formations approached 1,000-plus bombers with 800 escorts. Germany no longer took off. They watched from the ground and waited for the end. His final entry, dated May 7, 1945, captured the essence of the catastrophe. The Americans could have won with 1/10 of what they sent. They sent everything to make a point. The point was made. There was perhaps no more powerful admission of defeat than the secret intelligence recording made by General Oberst Hans-Jürgen Stumpf, Chief of Air Fleet Reich, as he spoke candidly to fellow prisoners in May 1945. His words, captured by British listeners, cut through every myth of military superiority. Gentlemen, we were not defeated by valor or tactical skill. The Americans showed bravery, absolutely, but no greater bravery than we possessed. Their aviators flew with expertise, certainly, but their skill matched ours. We were defeated by something else entirely, by sheer productive capacity. In a single month, they manufactured more aircraft than we could build in an entire year. They trained more pilots in 7 days than we could train in half a year. They unleashed more tonnage of bombs in one bombing run than we dropped across all of England during the whole war. This was not warfare as we had understood it. This was industrial obliteration. They transformed their entire country into one vast aircraft production facility. Women who once assembled washing machines now assembled aircraft components. Men who once built automobiles now constructed bombers. They treated war like a business problem, with spreadsheets, production targets, and efficiency calculations. We fought with warriors' passion and determination. They fought with accountants' mathematics and precision, and the accountants emerged victorious. For many Luftwaffe pilots, a precise instant arrived when they grasped that victory was no longer possible. These moments, drawn from written memoirs, recorded interviews, and personal correspondence, expose the devastating psychological weight of confronting vastly superior industrial resources. Oberleutnant Oskar Busch, flying with JG-3, experienced this realization on March 2, 1940. I observed a B-17 formation so enormous that I might have been watching from Link's observation post. Behind that wave came another formation, then another and yet another still. I counted 7 combat boxes, each containing 54 bombers, and this represented only one of 3 separate raids that single day. When I landed and reported to my commanding officer, the words came out unbidden. The war is finished. We simply haven't recognized it yet. Hauptmann Helmut Habermans of JG-52 recounted April 1944. We achieved our greatest success that day, destroying 11 B-17s in a single mission. Our pilots celebrated that night, believing they'd struck a crushing blow. The following morning, the Americans returned with 50 additional bombers compared to the previous day's force. Our triumph had gone completely unnoticed, as though those 11 destroyed aircraft meant nothing in the endless American supply. Major Klaus Mettig from JG-26 described a moment in September 1944 that crystallized American power itself. A B-17 with both engines damaged managed to limp away from battle, continuing forward, continuing to fire its weapons, continuing to transmit intelligence. Its gunners killed 2 of our most experienced pilots. Here was a crippled, dying bomber proving more lethal than our finest fighter aircraft. That single moment showed me the true nature of American strength. Beyond mere numerical advantage, American technology continuously advanced while German capabilities stagnated. The B-17G, introduced late in 1943, featured Bendix's chin turret mounting 50 caliber machine guns, an upgraded Norden bomb sight with autopilot integration, superchargers providing consistent performance at altitude, and radar countermeasure dispensers confusing German detection systems. Meanwhile, German fighters underwent grim simplifications. Cockpit heating vanished. Electric systems gave way to manual operation. Substitute materials replaced aluminum as shortages deepened. Armor plating was stripped away to reduce weight. Radio equipment disappeared from training aircraft entirely. Oberleutnant Heinrich Ehrler, who had achieved 208 confirmed victories before his death, documented this technological divergence in his wartime writings. Each passing month, American aircraft improve. Each passing month, our aircraft deteriorate. They introduce new guns. We remove protective armor. They develop superior engines. We dilute our fuel supply. They enhance their electronics. We eliminate our radios. We travel backward while they surge forward. The gulf between American and German pilot preparation revealed the hopelessness of German victory more starkly than production numbers alone could convey. American pilot training by 1944 demanded 200 hours minimum of total flying experience before combat assignment, 75 hours minimum in their combat aircraft type, 50 hours of gunnery instruction, 40 hours of formation practice, unlimited fuel for training purposes, and absence of combat pressure during the learning process. German pilot training by 1944 had contracted to 110 to 160 hours total flying time, diminished from 450 hours in 1941, merely 15 to 20 hours in their operational fighter type, 5 hours of gunnery training, 0 formation flying instruction, severe fuel rationing, and training airfields constantly threatened by enemy attack. Oberst Hannes Trautloft, interviewed after the war, reflected on the human toll. We dispatched children to their deaths. These pilots could barely manage basic flying, let alone combat. Formation flying was beyond their capability. Aiming their weapons proved impossible. Many crashed attempting simple landings. Of every 10 replacement pilots sent to operational squadrons, 8 perished within 14 days. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe's internal structure had collapsed psychologically. Pilot suicides jumped 400%. Desertion, previously almost unknown in German military culture, became routine. Some aviators deliberately sabotaged their own fighters to avoid flying missions. Secret SS intelligence reports discovered in the post-war period documented this cascading breakdown. One report from SS Sturmbannführer Wilhelm Damberg in December 1944 stated plainly, "Fighter pilots openly declare the war is finished. They call their combat assignments suicide flights. Certain pilots are deliberately expending their ammunition over German territory and returning claiming they engaged enemy forces. No propaganda campaign and no disciplinary action can restore morale. The pilots have observed American strength firsthand. The Luftwaffe leadership, desperate and grasping, initiated increasingly extreme responses. Ramming orders were issued against bombing formations. Specialized Ram-Jäger suicide attack squadrons were organized. Court-martial proceedings for perceived cowardice increased 800%. Families of suspected disloyal pilots faced threats of concentration camp imprisonment. Nothing succeeded. The pilots had witnessed too much. March 18, 1945, delivered the ultimate degradation. 1,329 American heavy bombers, escorted by 733 fighters, attacked Berlin in broad daylight. The Luftwaffe scrambled 37 fighters in response. The Me-262 jets achieved 8 bomber kills. American escort fighters destroyed 25 German aircraft, including 5 jets. Adolf Galland, commanding jet fighters from JV-44, a squadron assembled from Germany's most accomplished aces, recounted the day's events with bitterness. "We launched knowing resistance was pointless. Each pilot in my unit, myself, Barkhorn, Hohagen, Krupinski, Lutzow, possessed over 100 confirmed kills. Combined, we had destroyed more than 1,000 enemy aircraft, and we accomplished nothing, absolutely nothing. We were insects hurling ourselves against an avalanche." By April 1945, the Luftwaffe had essentially stopped existing. American bombers now traversed German skies without camouflage, their aluminum fuselages gleaming openly. They flew straight toward their targets, abandoning evasive maneuvers as unnecessary. Fighter escort missions were frequently cancelled as redundant. 8th Air Force mission documentation from April 1945 repeated the same phrase across multiple reports. No enemy aircraft encountered. No opposition experienced. Target destroyed unopposed. Crews reported the mission resembled a training exercise. The declining Luftwaffe sortie numbers chronicle the collapse definitively. During the Battle of France in May 1940, 5,000 sorties daily. The Battle of Britain in August 1940 sustained 3,000 sorties daily. D-Day in June 1944 produced 319 sorties. By March 1945, sorties had fallen to 50 to 100 daily. In May 1945, fewer than 10 sorties occurred. Following Germany's surrender, the United States Strategic Bombing Survey conducted extensive interviews with hundreds of Luftwaffe personnel. These testimonies, declassified during the 1960s, provided the concluding judgment on American industrial dominance. General Feldmarschall Erhard Milch, Inspector General of the Luftwaffe, explained what they had learned from intelligence assessments. We received reports that America was producing 8,000 aircraft monthly during 1944. We dismissed these as impossible exaggeration. Our record production occurred in autumn 1944, when we approached 4,000 aircraft. Yet the intelligence estimates proved conservative. They were actually producing 9,000 monthly. How can any nation engage an opponent manufacturing more aircraft in 2 months than you have produced in 24 months? General Stumpf added his own assessment years later. The Americans demonstrated that contemporary warfare is decided not by warriors, but by workers. Each bomber flying toward German targets represented thousands of factory workers, miners, and refinery operators. We were not truly fighting pilots. We were fighting Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Seattle. The final air war accounting reveals the insurmountable challenge facing German fighter forces. Heavy bomber production showed America manufacturing 35,000 four-engine bombers against Germany's 1,194, a ratio of 29 to 1. Fighter aircraft production from 1941 through 1945 showed America building 99,955 fighters against Germany's 53,729, a ratio of nearly 2 to 1. Pilot training hours showed American pilots averaging 200 hours before combat, compared to German pilots receiving 110 to 160 hours by 1944, a ratio of 1.5 to 1. Fuel availability revealed America with unlimited reserves, while Germany possessed merely 10% of its requirements by 1945. Sortie rates peaked at 8,000 plus daily for America by 1945 versus 100 daily for Germany, an 80 to 1 ratio. The war's psychological aftermath extended far beyond combat itself. Many German pilots experienced what would later be recognized as post-traumatic stress, originating specifically from the impossible circumstances they had endured. Dr. Hans-Joachim Lehmann, a Luftwaffe medical officer turned psychiatrist, studied surviving fighter pilots throughout the 1950s. They carried a distinctive type of trauma, not from what they experienced, but from what they witnessed. They had seen their nation's helplessness against American industrial power. They had observed their companions perish against an adversary that scarcely acknowledged such losses. They had endured not military defeat alone, but irrelevance itself. In 1962, former Luftwaffe fighter pilots assembled for a reunion in Munich. Adolf Galland, speaking as the keynote presenter, reflected on the lessons American air superiority had taught. We learned that in contemporary warfare, the factory matters more than the airfield. The assembly line proves more decisive than the battlefield. The industrial worker becomes more valuable than the combatant. America demonstrated that industrial democracy could generate greater output than totalitarian systems. They overwhelmed us beneath their productive weight. Yet they also taught something deeper. The Americans reconstructed our nation after vanquishing it. They shielded us from Soviet expansion. They converted adversaries into companions. That was perhaps their greatest victory. Not that they could manufacture 100,000 aircraft, but that they chose to employ that power for rebuilding rather than retribution. On April 26, 1985, marking the 40th anniversary of his capture, Johannes Steinhoff, former Luftwaffe ace and later NATO commander, addressed young officers at the United States Air Force Academy. "Let me convey what confronting American air power signifies," he began. "It signifies watching the horizon transform black with bombers. It means measuring your ammunition in seconds while adversaries measure theirs in hours. It means witnessing your finest pilots, veterans of 5 years of continuous combat, disappear from the sky in mere minutes. Beyond that, it means experiencing the staggering force of liberated democratic industrial capacity. Every B-17 traversing German skies represented American workers, American materials, American resolve. We calculated our aircraft in dozens, you calculated in thousands. We measured fuel in liters, you measured in oceans. The lesson is not that America triumphed due to wealth, rather America could mobilize its wealth because it was free. Free workers surpassed slave labor, free competition outperformed state control. Free citizens outfought passionate zealots. I completed 993 combat missions. I destroyed 176 aircraft. I was shot down 12 times. Yet my greatest mission was the internal one. The transformation from Nazi believer to democratic participant, from enemy to friend, from military defeat to comprehension. To the Americans here assembled, your predecessors did not merely defeat us, they reformed us. They illustrated that genuine strength emerges not from territorial conquest, but from productivity, not from dogma, but from capacity, not from animosity, but from principle. The bombing brought destruction, the reconstruction brought transformation. We, who previously populated these skies as antagonists, now occupy this hall as companions. That represents America's authentic achievement. The Luftwaffe's realization of defeat ultimately distills to one overwhelming truth: industrial production capacity, boundless, implacable, unquestionable. When Hauptmann Heinz Knöckel gazed upward at 291 B-17s approaching Schweinfurt on October 14, 1943, he observed far more than an enemy bombardment formation. He perceived the mathematical inevitability of German collapse. Each bomber represented 1.2 million rivets fastened by American workers. Each engine comprised 7,000 precisely manufactured components. Each aircrew member represented 200 hours minimum of instruction. Multiply this across 1,000 separate bombing campaigns, and the calculation became incalculable. The Luftwaffe's fighter aces numbered among history's supreme aerial combatants. Numerous achieved over 100 confirmed kills. Several surpassed 200. Erich Hartmann attained 352. Yet exceptional skill could not transcend production statistics. Extraordinary bravery could not overcome numerical data. Determination could not defeat industrial throughput. In conclusion, every Luftwaffe pilot who raised their gaze toward the metallic expanse of American bombers comprehended one indisputable fact. They battled not against a military air force. They engaged an entire civilization transformed entirely toward production. And that civilization could forfeit 100 bombers during daylight and deploy 200 additional bombers the following sunrise. The outcome became determined the instant American manufacturing achieved complete mobilization. The Luftwaffe aviators simply perceived it first, inscribed across their sky in endless formations of flying fortresses stretching from one horizon to the opposite, an unceasing cascade of aluminum flowing inevitably toward Germany's interior, transporting not merely ordnance, but the mathematical validation of absolute defeat. They beheld thousands of American bombers, and they recognized the war's conclusion, not due to the devastation those bombers would inflict, but due to what they symbolized, the boundless industrial power of democracy fully activated. Within that recognition resided both crushing defeat and ultimately profound redemption, because witnessing American industrial might granted them sight of American intention as well. Not imperial conquest, but human liberation. Not retribution, but restoration. Not vindictiveness, but possibility that former adversaries might transform into genuine allies. The industrial reckoning had been rendered. The Luftwaffe had witnessed it completely, and through that witnessing, they absorbed a universal truth that would reorder the post-war planet. Industrial democracy constituted humanity's strongest force, and America served as its forge.